We're going to start off like we've starting off for the last while with saying a chapter of Tehillim and giving tzedakah. If you have a pushka, please put some money in the pushka. We're going to say 2 chapters of Tehillim. Lam Natsayach Mizmor LeDavid Yan Chadinu Yim Sarai Sakef Hashem Elahei Yaakov Yishach Azacham Nikodesh Umitziyan Yisadeka Yishkakom Mechaisecha Veilos Vayidash Nesela Ten Lecha Chivavecha V'chalatzas Kayim Alei Niran Nabi Shuvasecha Vashem Aleinu Nidgal Yimali Adinai Kol Mishalisecha Ata Yedati Ki Yeshi Adonai Mashiach Yanei Mishmei Kadshei B'Gvuris Yesha Yeminei Ele Barecha Vele Basusum Nachnu Mishem Adinai Leinu Naskir Hema Karu Follow Nachnu Kamnu Vanisaydad Adinai Yeshia Melech Yaneinu V'Yayim Kareinu. And the last chapter of Tehillim, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Avakadra, Hallelujah, Bekia Uzay, Hallelujah, Begveresva, Hallelujah, Karev Gudlay, Hallelujah, Besek HaShofar, Hallelujah, Benevel V'Chinar, Hallelujah, Besef HaMachal, Hallelujah, Beminim V'Ugav, Hallelujah, Besilz L'Shama, Hallelujah, Besilz L'Sirua, Kol HaNeshama Talel, Yah, Hallelujah. And Baruch Hashem, yesterday we've seen beautiful videos, celebrations, thanking Hashem in the city. Kiryat Gat, Baruch Hashem, 1 Jewish captive came home, and we're waiting now just for the rest, 250, and then Mishava Banim Gvulam, all of us captives and gullus will all go home. But Hashem sees how much happiness it adds and how much thanks we give Him. Please, much, much more. We're holding here in the Gemara about 3 lines from the bottom of the page, Yud Ches Amud Beis 18b. If you have an art scroll, it's 18b3. 18b3 if you have an art scroll Gemara in front of you. We're up to the word V'hilchasa and halacha. Regarding our discussion, if you need to have lines etched into the parchment in mezuzos and tefillin, just like a Sefer Torah, and regarding could you write tefillin and mezuzos from memory, so says the Gemara, the hilchasa, and the halacha is tefillin ein tzrichin sirtot. Tefillin do not need to have lines etched into the parchment. This is halacha Moshe Sinai, halacha going back to the times of Moses. Like Rabbi Yirmiyah, because the purpose of the lines is to make the writing look nice, look beautiful, and to make the mitzvah look nice when you have lines etched into the parchment. And since tefillin are always rolled up and they're inside of the tefillin boxes and it's not seen unless you check it by a sofer, and even then the sofer sees it, so you don't have to be so particular about the beauty of the parshias of the tefillin, and therefore tefillin is kosher and when it's written without lines. Mezuzos tzrichin sirtot. Mezuzos, however, do need lines to be etched into the parchment. And mezuzos, they're part of Torah Shebiksav, part of the written Torah, and it's also used more often. The tefillin mezuzos are able to be seen more often, as well as it was very common for people to write their own mezuzos. So therefore, mezuzos must have lines. Idi v'idi nichtavas shalom min haksav. Tefillin and mezuzos are both allowed to be written from memory. You don't have to copy from another writing, whether it's a tikkun or another tefillin or a chumash. They're allowed to be written from memory. My time, what is the reason? Migras garsin, because everyone is very fluent in the contents of tefillin and mezuzos. Everyone knows the words inside. We say it every single day. We say Shema, Baruch Shem, not Baruch Shema, V'hayim Shemoya, V'ahavta, and then when it comes, that's what you have on the mezuzah. And in tefillin, the last 2 parshas of Hayek V'yacha and Kadesh Li, we say it every single day during davening, if you're wearing tefillin, whether with Rabbeinu Tam or whether in Rashi. Therefore, since everyone is familiar with it, it is kosher, it is okay to be written from memory. If you're not familiar with it, with the intricacies and the details, so then one should not write the tefillin and mezuzahs from memory. And that's halacha. Tefillin and mezuzahs are allowed to be written from memory. Better to always write it from another psav, from something else that's written. However, nowadays, the custom among all sofrim is that you have lines on all things written on parchment, whether it's tefillin, mezuzahs, sefer Torah. The only exception where you don't need is if what's called writing a kameya, an amulet, that does not need sirta, does not need lines. But even then, that's only if one is writing an amulet with Kabbalistic words. But if one writes an amulet and has a pasuk, even a verse from the Torah, anything which you're quoting, a pasuk, a verse from the Torah, Nevi'im, or Ksuvim, Tanakh, you have to have lines etched under that.
Excuse me, just
sure.
What do you recall? What the halakha is? How often you have to have a mezuzah checked? I believe it's twice in 7 years. And is it the same for tefillin?
Right. Halakha, it says in a public place, like in a shul, you never actually have to check the mezuzahs halachically. But it says you should do it. You should twice every 7 years, and Chabad minhag, Chabad custom is to do it every once a year.
The point is, if the ability, the min or the halakha to check mezuzahs and tefillin is the same, then I don't understand why mezuzahs, are considered to be more open than tefillin, because theoretically they would only be only open twice every 7 years anyhow.
Right. You're saying the tefillin get used every day, but mezuzahs could also be saying they're exposed to the elements. You're saying why should it be different? If the same halacha regards to how often they should get checked, it should be the same halacha regards to writing by heart.
No, but also to sirta, to which ones we just said that you didn't have to have lines for the tefillin,
right?
Because it's not going to be open. Well, it's going to be open the same time as a mezuzah, theoretically. I mean, twice every 7 years. So I don't understand the logic that says, tefillin don't need sirta and mezuzahs do need sirta, because mezuzahs are going to be either read or shown or open more often than tefillin. It shouldn't. I don't understand what the logic was behind that, even though we don't follow it today.
Right. So I'm just pulling up over here where the Rambam says this. The words of the Rambam: Tefillin einon tzrichin tzirtot mipnei shehem mechupin. The tefillin does not need to be lines because they are covered. However, mezuzahs, they say, need to have it, need to have sirtot.
But they're also covered.
Although, so the Kesef Mishnah and the Ran, I'm checking this up right now, I can bring it up online on the screen if you like. It says, although the mezuzah is covered, ruling the parchment is required, making the lines, because it can be removed from its covering very easily and must be checked twice every 7 years. Kesef Mishnah says there's no obligation to check your tefillin at all, and the parchments are almost never removed from the compartments.
Okay.
That's a Kesef Mishnah.
What's the Kesef Mishnah? Because you're not obligated to check your positions, he says?
Your tefillin, he says.
Oh, okay. By the way, earlier, a few inches after before, as far as how to arrange the words, so mentions Rabbi Shila Ish Gefar Tamarta.
Correct.
Is Tamarta actually related to Shitama?
I'm just going to bring it up on the screen for you.
Does it mean like actually date like an Aramaic or something?
For Tamarta?
A village of dates, would that be?
It makes up from saying maybe there's a lot of date trees over there.
What does Tamarta mean? Does it mean dates?
Tamarta means dates.
I thought so. So maybe it's like Aramaic.
So I'm just highlighting on the screen.
Yeah.
For that.
Probably like a lot of dates, like Squirrel Hill.
I'm just highlighting on the screen. It says over here. He says.
Squirrel Hill is actually named after squirrels.
Even though mezuzah is covered, ruling the parchment is required because it's harder to take out, I guess.
Mezuzah has to be covered?
Mezuzah, I don't think halachically it has to be covered, but it says that it's easy to take out a mezuzah. Tefillin is not easy to take out.
Just to cover it.
Well, seemingly have to cover a mezuzah just for respect, and if it's outdoors, definitely to cover it. But if you go in some of the old places, the mezuzahs were in an indent in the wall, right? There's a hole in the wall, and then they put the mezuzah in there. So not necessarily was it always covered. It's my guess.
This is also actually like when the husband and the wife are together having a relationship. Isn't it actually that?
Correct.
But there's an advantage of having the mezuzah covered then, right? Because
I'm saying the mezuzah shouldn't be there in the room. So there's certain things that are supposed to be done. One of them is having a non-transparent
cover.
So they have Megillah covers, mezuzah covers that are white, and then to put a covering on that.
Of course, if you close the door, actually, then it's also actually
correct. But some people have another room inside of the room, just depending on the setup of the room. If they have a porch going out from the room, it could be many different setups. In Pittsburgh is very common. You have what's called the railroad rooms. Well, one room leads into the next. So it's not so uncommon here. We're going to continue with explaining the next clause of the Mishnah, the next quote of the Mishnah. The Mishnah spoke about different types of colored inks, which are kosher for use in the Megillah. As well as the Mishnah spoke about different types of parchments, level of parchment, which are kosher for being used for writing a Megillah. The Mishnah stated that hoisak suva b'sam of a sikra, if the Megillah was written with sam, sikra, kumas, or kankantum, 4 different types of ink, the Megillah is not valid, it's invalid. And you must hear the Megillah again from a kosher Megillah. If one read the Megillah from a Megillah written with one of these 4 inks. So the Gemara will now define what are each of these 4 different inks.
These are not kosher?
Yeah, these are not kosher. Megillah is invalid. And the Mishnah said in order for a Megillah to be a kosher Megillah, has to be written on parchment, it has to be written with diyai. Nowadays in Hebrew, modern Hebrew, diyai means any type of ink, but diyai is a very specific type of ink. A black ink made from a specific mixture, concoction. So we'll learn about this now in the Gemara. Says the Gemara wants to define these 4 types of ink that are not valid, which are sam, sikra, kumas, and kankantum. Kankantum. There are 4 terms. What do they mean? Says the Gemara. Sam, what does the word sam mean? Sam means a potion. But in ink, it means sama. Sama is, in English, is called orpiment. It's I'll bring it up here on the screen. It's what the Gemara calls zarnich. Apurmento. So it's a I think a color, which is like a red color, if I remember correctly. Orpiment. Let me just put this up. Orpiment. It's a yellow type of color. It's made out of minerals, and it's not a very strong ink. I'm saying it doesn't last long. Here it is, zarnich. Zarnich is coal dust, shavings from chiseling, and some say it's arsenic. Arsenic. That's what sama is, arsenic. So all these things are if you make ink out of these type of materials, it's not kosher. Next, the Gemara says, what is sikra? Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, says Rabba bar bar Chana, sakarta shema. Its name is actually sakarta, which is a red dye, which Rashi says is used to color windows, shutters. And it comes from the sap of a tree. And that's what, so it's a red type of dye. So the first one is yellow ink, second one is red ink. Third one, kankantoim. What is kankantoim? Which is a color which you're not allowed to use to make ink with. It's called charta d'ushbechi. This is what was used by shoemakers to paint the shoes black. Yeah.
Studying a certain rabbi, you let him use it.
He let it correct, right? There's a whole discussion if let him use kankantum. It says because he mixed something into kankantum to make it last. The problem with these type of, it's like shoe polish, which doesn't stay in the shoes for too long.
Yeah, the other thing has to be erased.
Torah has to be able to be erased, but it has to be able to withstand moisture, wetness.
Yeah.
Meaning, if you pour water on it and it comes off, so then it's invalid. It has to be able that it could be erased with a.
The project and site that you want it to be able to do.
Correct. Right. So it's a shoemaker's type of ink, which is made from also a certain type of. Sorry, kankantum is. Yeah, kankantum is. On the contrary, it says kankantum, right? It's too strong. It can't be erased. You're saying you need something that could be erased. Okay? Diftera, demeliach. Diftera is a type of parchment which is not finished. Demeliach ukamitz v'layapitz. Niyar machka. Parchment which is not finished is made out of an animal hide. I'll bring up a video in a moment, which shows about the process of how they made the hide of an animal, how they make it into kosher parchment. There's many different stages, and there's different layers of the parchment. Diftera is after you removed the hair, but the parchment is still rough. That's diftera. It's not finished. They used to soak it with water, rinse it, and then they would put salt. Nowadays they put plaster. That's a different way. That's how they make it smooth, to remove all the bumps on the parchment. And there's three different stages of how they would make the hide ready to be used. So if it's only done 2 stages, but it's not completely ready to be used, so it's not completely smooth yet, so it was only treated with flour and water, but not treated with ufitz. Ufitz is one of the ingredients that are used to make ink, gallnuts. And if it wasn't treated with that, it's not completely smooth, then it's not valid parchment. Niyar machka. And also if you wrote the Megillah on paper, and the paper they had back then is papyrus, meaning it's a mixture of different, then they wouldn't make it so much out of wood chips, so make it out of rags, used clothes. So if you wrote the Megillah on a paper, it's also invalid.
Rags, not rats.
Rags.
Iris and paper, the words are related.
Here's example. This is how they made ink. This is, for example, how we make ink with the. I'm not sure if you could hear this. Hello.
And then, are they making a change for children?
Now this stuff is extremely black powder is basically just coloring.
Anyways, it's a mixture of these several different.
I couldn't exactly hear.
Right.
What else is happening to the skin? What color is the skin now? White. And that's exactly what we want for there to happen to the skin. Once the skin turns white and we get all the hair off, the next step is we need to stretch it out. And to stretch it out takes quite a bit of work. And you'll see how this particular frame has stretched out this skin very tightly. And
So here's the original skin before it becomes parchment. It's a goat skin. That's the ones I usually use. Oh, it's not working right now.
My goodness.
So the kids are taking scrapers, scrape off all the hair. It becomes completely smooth.
Much more easily. The reason for that is because its human skin stretches so much. So,
And then when it comes to making the ink, this one might be a little bit better.
Yeah.
See how it's going. Correct.
Letter of the Torah is written on parchment made from the skin of a kosher animal.
This is
Washed, dried, stretched, cleaned, and smoothed.
So this is a process of making parchment. It has to be stretched, it has to be washed, cleaned. Yeah, it's not making a cloth has to be done with clean.
The entire Sefer Torah is written. The individual parchment sheets are sewn together with sinews called giddin, which are taken from a kosher animal.
No, that's big. See, this is how
It's then scored with lines in final preparation.
this is how they're making the lines. You see the sirtut?
The scribe must be a God-fearing Jew, well versed in the thousands of laws pertaining to the writing of a Sefer Torah and the other holy texts, such as tefillin and mezuzahs. The quill, called a kulmus, used to write the Sefer Torah, is taken from a kosher bird, usually a goose or turkey. The feathers are stripped, and the point is cut, formed, and split to facilitate a steady flow of ink. In the Torah, there are some variations in letter size and paragraph spacing. One example is the Shema Yisrael. The letter ayin of the word Shema and the letter Daled of the word Echad are enlarged to spell aid, meaning witness, testifying our declaration of God's unique oneness in the universe. Now for generations, Jews have decorated the Torah out of their respect and affection. The housing, bias in Hebrew, of a Sephardic Torah scroll is made from.
That's the idea of how a Torah is made. So it's very important. It has to be written only on real parchment, finished parchment, and with ink that's made out of a special type of ink, which is called diyai. It's part of it's part of the cost. I mean, everything is handmade. I mean, and there's certain. I mean, it's a chumrah. It's better to have parchment that's used from an animal that was shechted properly. So that's, if you get that type, it's a little more expensive also.
I wonder what it's called, just the parchment in a Sefer Torah.
And so, right,
Many thousands.
I'm sure. I'm saying most Sofrim don't make their own parchment. Most Sofrim order from those who make parchments, like in a large scale. And there are certain suffering, someone in Crown Heights, who makes everything from A to Z. The parchment, they make themselves. Tefillin, there's like a waiting list about, I think, 6-7 years. They get tefillin from them. But every single thing they do themselves. It's Rabbi Altine from Pittsburgh's son. There's like a waiting list. Yeah, he's taking me on a tour once of his basement. It's amazing to see. It's a whole factory from A to Z of how they make the entire. They make everything is made themselves. The glue that they use to close the tefillin is also made there. Every single detail they do it themselves. They don't rely on anybody else. So, and there's a very long waiting list to get his tefillin.
Actually, you have a show that was slaughtered, so that the meat goes at
Correct.
the food and the skin is given. That's from the same animal, right?
Correct. Right. The skin could be used for. Right. To Torah. Next, it was taught in the Mishnah that a Megillah has to be written in Hebrew, the one we saw with the crowns as a Torah is written. Tichsiv as it is written. Kichsavam v'chizmanam. The words in the Megillah says, as is on the screen, that the Jews accepted upon themselves to keep the holiday of Purim, kichsavam v'chizmanam, as it is written and in their appointed times. So as they are written means as they are written in the Torah. So it has to be written in Ashuris, in Hebrew lettering, the way it's written in a Torah. Although we said earlier that one can read the Megillah in a different language, not necessarily in Hebrew, even if the Torah is written in a different language, it has to be written with Torah letters. So if you're saying and it was, you have to write Aleph Nun Daled, Aleph Tes, or Aleph Yates. You have to write it in Hebrew letters.
So it's exactly how Jews actually used to do.
Yiddish or many languages. Yiddish is not a Hebrew, but it's written in Hebrew letters.
So it's possible that Rashi, even though he spoke French, possible he didn't know how to write it in Roman characters, so it's actually used to write in Hebrew. Yeah.
You're saying he used to write even in other languages. For example, the Rambam, he only wrote one sefer in Hebrew. Everything else was written in Arabic. But the Arabic the Rambam used was Hebrew letters.
And recently, actually, they discovered one thing. Actually, it says like a note or something. The Rambam wrote, I think for like his medical stuff.
Interesting, and wrote in a different language. Interesting.
Apparently, he was accustomed actually to write Hebrew, but here probably as a doctor dealing with Goyim.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
So they found something in the Rambam medically written in a different language. Interesting. Last Gemara until the Mishnah, it says Ala Sefer V'diyai. It says a Megillah must be written upon parchment and with black ink. Ask the Gemara, Minalan, what is a source for the statement that a Megillah must be written in a parchment and black ink? And it can't be parchment that's half finished, it has to be completely finished, and it has to be black ink and no other color. Where do we know this from? The Gemara says, Asya ksiva ksiva. We learn Gzeira Shava. We can learn one word and another word which have one pasuk, one verse, and another verse have the same word. There's a prophet Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu he lived a very long time. He's seen many of the Jewish kings, and he was a prophet during the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. He had a student named Baruch ben Uriah. I mentioned him earlier. Baruch ben Uriah lived very long. He lived all the way to the time of the building of the second Beis Hamikdash, and he lived to be. But he was in Bavel. He was too old and sick to move back to Eretz Yisrael, to Israel, and he passed away a year after the second Beis Hamikdash was finished being built. Ezra, his student, only returned to Eretz Yisrael after Baruch ben Uriah passed away. We learn from there it's more important to learn Torah than to build the Beis Hamikdash. So Yirmiyahu, he commanded his student Baruch ben Uriah to write a Megillah, writing what will happen to the Jewish people if they don't listen to the ways of Hashem. What's this Megillah called? Megillah Eicha. Right? So Baruch ben Uriah wrote down a Megillah called Megillah Eicha on the command of his mentor, of his teacher, Yirmiyahu HaNavi, Yirmiyah the prophet. And he read this Megillah in front of one of the Jewish kings. He also read this Megillah in the office of Gemara, the son of Shaphan, who was a sofer. They found some old clay tablets with this person's name, and he was a royal scribe. So the Jewish people asked Yirmiyahu, how did you write this Megillah? How did you write this scroll? They asked Baruch ben Neriah, how did you write it? And is this you saying it, or is this Yirmiyahu saying it? Because everyone knew Yirmiyahu was a Navi, but they didn't know about Baruch ben Neriah, that he was also a prophet, a Navi. So he answered them that everything I wrote down in this Megillah, in this scroll, I wrote down only what Yirmiyahu told me to write. And he told me all the details of how I have to write it. I wrote it ala sefer v'diyai. I wrote it on parchment and with black ink. So from there we see that writing a Megillah is done with parchment and black ink. And we have two psukim, the word in the Megillah and the word by Baruch ben Neriah, you can compare from one to the other. Ksiv Hakad is written here in Megillah's Esther. It says, "Vatichtoiv Esther Hamalka," and Esther, the queen, wrote down everything, the whole story of Purim. She wrote down the Megillah. Uksiv Hasam, and is written in Yirmiyahu. Vayomer Lem Baruch, and Baruch answered the Jewish nation. Mipiv Yikarei Elai is Kol Advarim Ha'ele. Everything I wrote down in this Megillah, in this scroll, I wrote from his mouth, from the mouth of Yirmiyahu Hanavi. And I'm writing them down with ink on parchment. So just as over there was written with ink on parchment, when Baruch ben Neriah wrote down his scroll, so too over here when Esther wrote down the Megillah is written with ink and parchment. And from there we learn that the Megillah has the same sanctity. It has to be written always with ink and parchment. Now, to learn Gzeira Shava, to learn from one verse to another verse, which happen to have the same word, is not something we could do by ourselves. Into that, to find similar words in Tanakh.
We become like Karaites that we fool around with the text.
Correct.
With the tradition.
Right. That's like the Karaim do it. They play around with the written Torah. That's not something we could do. In this particular case, besides we're having the tradition to compare it, but we also have two different aspects in the Megillah. We have two competing, you could say, teachings, teaching us how the Megillah should be written. On the one hand, Megillah is called Kiksavai, a sefer. It's like a sefer Torah. It has to be written with many characteristics of a sefer Torah. On the other hand, Megillah is called Igeres, a letter. And there's many aspects which a sefer Torah is different than a Megillah. For example, if in a sefer Torah you have a letter or a word which is not valid or missing, you have to take out a new Torah. By Megillah, it's not so. Even if many words are missing, many parts are missing, letters or words are invalid, you still continue reading the Megillah. So we know there's two aspects to Megillah. On the one hand, it's like a letter, an Igeres. On the other hand, it's like a Sefer Torah. It has to have lines etched into it. So which aspects, which details are like a Sefer Torah, which details are like a letter? So for that, we have the Gzeira Shava. For that, we have the comparison of the two psukim, which have the same word, Vatichtoiv, and he wrote, and she wrote, to teach us that in this aspect, the Megillah is like a Sefer Torah. It has to be written down on parchment and in ink, in black ink. And so this concludes this Mishnah. We'll continue now with some Kuntras Umayan. On the screen as well, but if you have a book, let's say in front of you, we're in Maimer Chafei, Maimer 25, Perek Daled, chapter 4. At this point, we're coming to sort of the practical applications of Kuntras Umayan from the Rebbe Rashab. The previous chapter of the Maimer, we learned how the Rebbe Rashab is sort of giving it in a strong way to those people who are businessmen, but they either don't daven with a minyan because they're rushing to work, or they daven in a minyan only sometimes, or even when they do daven with a minyan, they're rushing, they're not concentrating on the words of davening, they're thinking of everything else but davening. Or even on Shabbos, when they're supposed to relax and concentrate on davening with more kavana, they waste their time on Shabbos. And he says that all the reasons for doing this, thinking you're going to earn more money, it's a false imagination that's being fed to the person from the Yetzer Hara, telling them that if I rush faster, I'm going to make more money. If I don't daven with a minyan, I don't learn Torah, I'll be more successful. No matter what you do, you're never going to make the budget that was allotted to you in Rosh Hashanah. You're not going to make it more. So by even a little bit of effort, it's also enough to bring down the godly blessings. It's considered to be enough of a keli, of a means to bring down the godly blessings from Hashem. And to think that this is something very hard to attain, that, I'm really going to, give up what looks like an opportunity in order to go daven with more kavana, I might lose out from that. So the Rebbe Rashab will now say that it's not really such a difficult thing for a Jew to accomplish, because we are maminim b'nei maminim, believers, the son of believers. Avram Avinu, Avram our father, is called the father of all believers, as we learned, as I said in last week's parsha. V'hemin b'Hashem, and Avram believed in Hashem. Avram Avinu, he shred the path for us in many things. Mesiras Nefesh, in giving up our life, and giving up our comforts for Hashem, as well as Avram Avinu, he opened up the path of zrizus, alacrity, doing things with excitement. Avram Avinu also, he opened up the pathway to emunah, to belief. He's a father of all believers. Time. And therefore, every single Jewish person, by default, just by build of who they are, has in their heart already a very strong, sincere belief in Hashem. And the Torah testifies about this. It says, when Moshe Rabbeinu came to Egypt, came to Mitzrayim, and told the Jews, Hashem sent me to redeem you, they didn't ask him for any signs or any miracles. He was ready with them, but he didn't ask him for anything. He didn't yet reprimand Paroi. He just told the people, it says, Vayamin ha'am. And the people believed. Why? Because innately Jews are believers, they believe in Hashem. And later on, it says, Vayaminu b'Hashem. When they crossed the Red Sea and Hashem split the sea, they believed in Hashem. Says in Kunter Sumayan, Hine Yisrael heim maminim b'nei maminim. Jewish people are called believers, and we are the descendants of believers, of our fathers who also believed with a very big faith. So Gemara Masechta Shabbos, that's Havdik Zayin Amud Aleph. The emunah hi b'teva toldasam. Faith is in our DNA. It's our heritage, and it's in our nature. With this, all the nations of the world are different than the Jews. All the other nations of the world. There are many believers of many other religions of the world. And some of them are very innately, deeply connected to their religion. It's not natural. It's not something which comes by osmosis. It is an inborn trait, something that they acquired externally. Like we see, for example, when it comes to intellect. There's two types of understanding. There's one type of understanding which is innately a person knows this, and there's another which is what we call the subconscious, and there's another type of understanding and intellect which you needed someone else or something else to teach it to you. This is a general difference between human intellect and animal intellect. A person is innately intelligent, innately a intelligent being, and therefore there's many things which a person understands without having to really be taught about it. Fire is hot or things like that, they know innately. And the intellect of animals is something that they acquire. Says the ox knows its master, and the donkey knows the feeding tray, the feeding trough that it gets from its master. They know what they're given, but they don't necessarily know by themselves. And you're able to train animals in different ways. A mardas means a saddle cloth, but mardas also comes from the term moire das. Moire means teaching, das is knowledge. To have a horse or an animal to wear a saddle, you have to teach it, you have to train it. It takes time. It's not innately born into it. But a man's intelligence is essential. And when it comes to belief, a similar type of thing plays out. When it comes to belief in Hashem, all the nations of the world, they come from something external. But to a difference, however, by the Jewish people, it's an essential love of Hashem. Try asking the Jew nowadays. Many Jews, Baruch Hashem, because of persecution, they come out from the woodwork, and they're inspired, and they're feeling excited about Yiddishkeit now, like they've never been either in their life or as far as they can remember. And where does that come from? They can't explain it. Something innately. It's innately born in us. Sometimes it's covered over, sometimes it's hidden, sometimes we need something to stimulate, to reveal it, but it's something which is essential, innately in the person. Tanya speaks about this many, many chapters. It's an essential thing, a natural thing by the Jewish people. We're naturally believers. It's not something that we have to work on ourselves. We sometimes have to work on ourselves to strengthen it, or to not be sidetracked by something else, distractions or a test. And there's a story it's brought down that there was one time the Tsar came to, I think it was the city of Babruisk, a very Jewish city. I think about half the city was Jewish. And the custom was, whenever the Tsar came to the city, all the wagon drivers of the city would, they would clean their wagons, clean their chariots, clean their horses, make everything, dress in their nicest, and they would stand and greet the Tsar. And if the Tsar was in the mood, he would choose one of them, or either throw coins at them or go take a ride with one of them. The Tsar came into the city of Babruisk, and this is, I think, Tsar Nicholas, who was a very big anti-Semite. And he was also a tyrant, a very cruel person. And he came into the city, and he was in a very bad mood coming into the city. He came late. Everyone's waiting for him to greet him. Galloped into the city. And he saw the Jewish wagon drivers. He got very angry at them. His anger, it didn't take him much to get angry. And he ran over to one of the Jewish wagon drivers, and he pulled out a cross, and he says, I want you to kiss us right now. He says, I'm sorry, I'm Jewish, I can't. And the Tsar pulled out a sword, and he says, you kiss her right now, or I'm going to chop your head off this second. And the Jew started crying and says, Your Majesty, I'll do anything for you. I'll kiss the boots of your feet, but I can't do this. And he threatened him, and the Jew says, I'm so sorry, kill me if you need to, but, I'll kiss a cross. And after a few minutes of this, tormenting this Jew, the Tsar just stormed off. He went over to one of the non-Jewish wagon drivers on the other side of the market, pulled out the same exact cross, went over to a non-Jewish wagon driver, and he says, I want you to urinate on this cross. He says, Your Majesty, I believe this is holy. I can't do it. Pulled out a sword, and he says, or a revolver, says, do it right now, or I'm going to shoot you, I'm going to kill you. He says, Your Majesty, and eventually the wagon driver did it. Right, the non-Jewish wagon driver urinated on the cross, and the Tsar was very angry, even more angrier, and he got back into his horse, and he stormed out of town. The story brought down, in some of the old Svarim. But Jewish people, belief is innate; it's essential. There's a certain town. I forgot that it's a city in Poland. There was a very Jewish city. When there was one Jewish person in the city which had nothing to do with Judaism at all, and on the contrary, he was quite against it. But when the Nazis came and they gathered all the Jews of the city, and instead of trying to blend in or run away, he went and he joined the Jews in the city in the shul. And the Nazis, before they killed everybody, they harassed everyone, and they went over to the rabbi of the city and told him, they pulled out a Torah, I want you to urinate on this Torah. And this Jew, whose entire life was totally estranged from Yiddishkeit, he pulled up, he ran up and he says, nope, don't let him do it. I want to do it first. And said, who are you? He pushed the rabbi to the side. I want to do it first. And then the Nazi says, okay, do it. And then he says, then he told the Nazi, I want you to come next to me to watch. And then the Nazi came over to him, he attacked him, he was shot, he was killed. But he says, the story was told over by a survivor, one person who survived from that shul. But the Jew who was so far from Yiddishkeit his entire life, he was ready to give up his life, not to disrespect the Torah. Why? He didn't follow anything the Torah said his entire life. But by a Jew, it's natural to believe in Hashem. Hashem built us. So it comes in our DNA. And this is very clearly shown, very clearly apparent. In every single thing, whether it's good or whether it's the opposite. Hashem's name is commonplace on people's mouth, people's tongue. It's a common expression. God forbid. Thank God. And in different phrasings, we say, Yisrachim Hashem Yisparach Hashem, God, have pity, Yochos Hashem Yisparach, Toil Hashem, Baruch Hashem, thank Hashem, Kiritza Behem, Besignuna is Tfilav Tachanunim V'toida. We have similar expressions of prayer, supplication, gratitude to Hashem. Why is this? By a Jewish person, the belief in Hashem is essential. It's part of who they are. As it says, they are our life. Torah is our life, and it's our length of our days. It makes us live long. And all these days of the difficult galus, we've been martyrs, suffered martyrs, and endured the harsh exile for this. Okay? Jewish martyrs are people which not necessarily have the same, there's martyrs in every religion, but a martyr in a different religion believes wholeheartedly in his religion. Yiddishkeit is not like that. You can have someone who gives up their life for Yiddishkeit, and if you ask them if they believe in Hashem, sometimes they'll say, I'm not so sure. Right? What do you call Hashem? What is God, etc.? It's something which is innate and natural into us. Rabbi Simon Jacobson says that he one time had to deal with an attorney, a woman, she was Jewish, knew very little about Yiddishkeit. Whenever he tried bringing up anything about Judaism, she quickly shut down the conversation before it even started. But she would always have this weird saying, weird words she would put into her conversations like Mitchum this, Mitchum, I'll meet you tomorrow, Mitchum, I'm traveling tomorrow here, Mitchum this, Mitchum will be in court. He didn't know what was going on Mitchum for a long time.
Who's Mitchum, your husband?
Finally, he realized after a few months of dealing and hearing the word Mitchum, he realized she was saying Mirtz Hashem.
Yeah.
But she didn't know the word. She was saying Mirtz Hashem. It's probably the word the expression, the phrase she was used to. So it's something natural and innate among every single Jewish person.
It's interesting that you have all of these various nations, right? They worshiping their gods, right? And then comes along, and force, to convert or die or whatever. But the kid wants to be Christian.
Right.
And they give up